The fog clung to the hills of upstate New York like a shroud that refused to lift. It rolled down from the Adirondack foothills in thick gray waves, pooling in the valleys where Black Hollow nestled, a town of clapboard houses, a single traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 p.m., and a main street that still had a hardware store called Eldridge Sons, even though the Sons had been gone for decades. Above the town, on the highest ridge, Eldridge Manor presided like a brooding sentinel. Its 3 stories of dark stone and gingerbread trim had been built in 1878 by Reginald Eldridge I, a railroad magnate who'd clawed his way from Irish immigrant to Gilded Age baron. The house had 32 rooms, 11 fireplaces, a ballroom nobody used anymore, and a reputation that kept most locals away after dark. In the autumn of 2025, only 4 people lived there full-time. Elliot Eldridge, 62, was the last direct male heir. Tall, thin, silver-haired, he wore tweed jackets even in summer and spent his days in the 3rd-floor library, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and yellowed photographs. He had once been a rising star at Goldman Sachs, until the 2008 crash, a nervous breakdown, and the quiet decision to retreat to the family seat. His wife, Claire, had died of ovarian cancer 7 years earlier. They had no children. Elliot spoke little, smiled rarely, and collected obscure facts about 19th-century rail disasters, the way other men collected stamps. His younger sister, Vivian, 58, handled what remained of the family fortune. The trust fund, once vast, had shrunk to a modest 8-figure sum after decades of poor investments and generous charitable donations mandated by old Reginald's will. Vivian worked from a converted bedroom in the East Wing, her desk buried under spreadsheets, tax forms, and half-empty mugs of black coffee. She wore severe blazers, kept her graying hair in a tight chignon, and had a habit of tapping her pen against her teeth when numbers didn't add up. People said she was the practical one. People also said she resented Elliot for inheriting the house outright while she managed its slow bleed. Dr. Harlan Crow, 65, their first cousin on their mother's side, had arrived 3 years earlier after his pathology practice in Albany imploded. A malpractice suit, botched autopsy testimony in a high-profile murder trial, had cost him his license and most of his savings. He was broad-shouldered, white-bearded, and surprisingly cheerful for a man who'd spent 40 years cutting open the dead. He occupied the West Wing guest suite, spent mornings walking the grounds with a walking stick he didn't need, and evenings reading forensic journals or watching old Hitchcock films in the parlor. Mrs. Elena Vasquez, 61, had been the housekeeper since 1992. Slight, dark-haired, with eyes that missed nothing, she moved through the house like a shadow, polishing silver, airing linens, preparing meals. No one ever seemed to finish. She lived in the small apartment above the carriage house and rarely spoke unless spoken to. The family trusted her implicitly. She had stayed through bankruptcies, funerals, and long winters when the furnace failed. For most of September and October, life at Eldridge Manor followed its usual quiet rhythm. Until the night of October 14th, at 1:13 a.m., the grandfather clock in the grand foyer, a towering English mahogany case with brass Westminster chimes installed in 1882, began to strike the hour. Everyone in the house heard it, even those half asleep. 1, 2, 3, up to 12. Then, impossibly, a 13th chime, deep, resonant, identical in timbre to the others, rolled through the darkened halls. The next morning, old Jed Harlan, the groundskeeper who'd worked the property for 41 years, was found at the bottom of the cellar stairs. His neck was broken. The county deputy who responded took one look at the loose handrail, the damp stone steps, and the man's age, 78, and wrote it up as an accident. No autopsy, no photos beyond a few cell phone snaps. Jed had always gone down to check the boiler around 1:30 a.m. He must have slipped. That same evening, the clock struck 13 again. Maria Delgado, the part-time cook who came 3 days a week, was discovered in the kitchen pantry at dawn. An open jar of almonds sat on the counter beside her body. The coroner found cyanide in her system. She'd been fond of cracking the nuts between her molars while prepping breakfast. Tragic accident, the report read. Possible contamination at the supplier. The almonds were thrown out. No one tested the rest of the jar. The third night brought the 13th chime once more. Leonard Weiss, the family attorney, had driven up from New York City to review Elliot's latest will revisions. He was found slumped over the partner's desk in the study, eyes open, coffee cold beside his hand. Cause of death, ruptured cerebral aneurysm. He'd been under enormous stress, the medical examiner noted. High blood pressure, long hours, a recent argument with Vivian over trust disbursements. Natural causes. By the 13th chime, the town was whispering about a curse. Detective Karen Mallory, 44, Black Hollow's sole detective and de facto sheriff, had ignored the first 2 deaths. Small towns had accidents. People died. But 3 in 12 days, all after the same eerie clock anomaly? That was different. Mallory was short, wiry, with close-cropped brown hair and a stare that could peel paint. She arrived at Eldridge Manor on the afternoon of October 27th with a forensics technician named Patel and a thermos of terrible precinct coffee. She interviewed everyone separately in the dining room, while Patel dusted the clock for prints. Elliot sat ramrod straight. I've disassembled the striking train 3 times. 12 hammers, 12 bells. Physically impossible to get 13 without replacing half the mechanism. Vivian crossed her arms. It's an old house. Things creak. Echoes play tricks. Harlan Crow rubbed his beard. Acoustics in these big rooms can be deceptive. Reverberation off the oak paneling, perhaps. Elena Vasquez folded her hands in her lap. I've heard it every night. Clear as day. 13. Patel found no prints on the clock case except Elliot's and Elena's, routine maintenance. The mechanism was original. No signs of tampering. Yet all 4 residents swore to the extra strike. Mallory left with more questions than answers. On the 13th night, October 27th into 28th, she returned. She gathered everyone in the foyer at 12:45 a.m., under the pretense of coordinating a plan. Coffee was poured. A plate of Elena's shortbread sat untouched. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, its pendulum swinging like a metronome. At 1:10, they all faced the clock. The minute hand touched 13 past. 1, 2, 3. They counted in unison, voices overlapping in the dim light. 10, 11, 12. Silence stretched. 13. The gong faded. No one moved. Mallory checked her atomic synced watch. 1:13:08. Everyone still here? Nods all around. Vivian's hand trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. At 7:42 the next morning, Elena found Harlan Crow dead in his bed. No signs of struggle. The medical examiner listed acute cerebral hemorrhage, natural, age-related. Yet Mallory had personally checked on him at 1:20 a.m., knocking on his door. He'd answered, sleepy but coherent, even cracking a joke about Victorian poisoners. 4 deaths, 4 13th chimes. Mallory called them to the library that evening. The fire snapped behind the grate. Rain lashed the leaded windows. "This isn't a ghost story," she said. "This is murder." Someone engineered the clock to create a pattern, to make every death look predestined. The 13th chime is the signature and the alibi. Elliot frowned. I told you, the mechanism can't. I believe you, Mallory cut in. So, let's look closer. Elena stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. It's not broken, detective. It's remembering. Mallory turned. Explain. Elena gestured to the clock. Mr. Reginald, Elliot's grandfather, was dying in 1985. Pancreatic cancer. He had the clock modified during a restoration. A second hammer, hidden behind the face, connected to a trip lever on the minute hand. At exactly 1:13, it strikes once more. He said it was to remind the family that time doesn't always end neatly, that there's always one more beat. His wife died at 1:13 a.m. in 1963. Complications after childbirth. He never got over it. Vivian gave a short, bitter laugh. A family fairy tale. Charming. Mallory motioned to Elliot. Open it. Elliot hesitated, then unlatched the glass door. Behind the dial, they found the secondary hammer, small, tarnished, elegant in its secrecy. The trip lever was intact, mechanical, no electronics. But Mallory wasn't satisfied. She knelt, reached into the base where the weights hung, and felt something smooth and modern among the iron cylinders. A miniature black box, a tiny speaker grill, a lithium coin battery, a digital timer. She held it up. This isn't Reginald's work. This is recent. The mechanical 13th chime is real, but weak, easily masked. This little gadget plays a recorded chime at precisely 1:13, perfectly synchronized, pitch-matched. It's been reinforcing the myth. Elena's eyes filled. I knew about the old trigger, but not this. Mallory turned to her. You said, remembering. You've known longer than you let on. Elena nodded slowly. 2 weeks ago, after the first death, I saw Miss Vivian at the clock. Late. She had tools, a small screwdriver. I thought she was trying to stop it. Vivian's face drained of color. Mallory stepped closer. You didn't stop it, did you? You replaced a dying battery, made sure the audio trigger would keep working flawlessly. Vivian's voice cracked. I only wanted the sound to stop frightening everyone. After Jed, you upgraded it, Mallory said, because you needed the pattern to continue. 4 deaths, 4 chimes. A curse. No one looks for a killer when fate is the suspect. Elliot stared at his sister. Why? Vivian sank into a wing chair. The firelight carved deep shadows across her face. Grandfather's will. If the last Eldridge heir dies childless, the estate, including the trust principal, reverts to the Black Hollow Historical Society. They get the house, the land, the collection. Everything. Elliot has no children. I have none. But the will has a survivorship clause. If Elliot dies first, then I become the sole heir. The society gets nothing. I get it all. Silence pressed against the walls. Elliot whispered, You killed for money? I killed for survival, Vivian said dully. The trust is hemorrhaging. Taxes, maintenance, medical bills from Harlan's lawsuit fall out. In 5 years, we'd have been selling off silver to pay the heating oil. I couldn't let it go to strangers. Mallory's voice was flat. Jed. I loosened the stair rail the afternoon before. He always checked the boiler after the chimes. Gravity did the rest. Maria? Cyanide crystals in the almond jar. I refilled it Tuesday. She always ate them while chopping onions. Weiss? placebos instead of his beta blockers, started months ago. The stress of the will revisions pushed his pressure over the edge. Harlan? Vivian looked at the floor. He took chamomile tea every night. I brought it to him after the group watch. A syringe full of air into the IV port while he dozed. Quick, merciful. Elliot covered his face with his hands. Mallory removed the cuffs from her belt. Vivian Eldridge, you are under arrest for 4 counts of murder in the 1st degree. As Mallory led her down the front steps, red and blue lights pulsed across the fog. Vivian didn't resist. She looked back once, at the house, at her brother standing in the doorway, then ducked into the cruiser. Elena removed the audio module that night, hands steady despite the tears. She placed it in a small wooden box beside Reginald's old photograph on the mantel. The next morning, the clock struck only 12. No extra chime echoed. No one died. Winter came early to Black Hollow that year. Snow blanketed the hills, softening the outline of Eldridge Manor. Elliot hired a new groundskeeper and a full-time cook. Elena stayed on, quieter than ever. The trust fund was audited. Vivian's embezzlement, small at first, then desperate, was uncovered. Enough remained to keep the house standing. Sometimes, late at night, Elliot would stand in the foyer and watch the clock. The pendulum swung. The hands moved. At 1:13, it struck 12. Clean, ordinary, final. He never heard 13 again. And in the silence that followed, the house seemed to breathe a little easier.